the Bible even talks about that the heart is a deceitful thing at times, because the heart is fueled by emotion, but the mind is fueled by knowledge of the Word of God. And one of the ways that we literally transform our mind is by reading the Word. So I love that you mentioned that, man. I have a more specific question to ask you, and this I'm going to try to phrase this in the best way possible, because growing up, I was always curious in this, and I had a lot of friends. There's a lot of people out there that may struggle with viewing something that they may not should be viewing.
Yeah.
Or acting on that in a way.
Yeah.
I think for a lot of people, some think that like one may be more acceptable than the other. Tell me, is both bad? Is one better than the other? Tell me theologically, what does the Bible say about the connection between pornography and actually acting on the action of self-pleasure?
Yeah. I mean, that's... So if we're looking at, book of Matthew, a couple chapters earlier, Matthew 5, Jesus is essentially saying, I mean, he's talking about what's the nature of sin.
Right.
But part of what he says is that sin is, this issue of anger and this issue of lust. So what is anger? Well, it's like, when we are angry with someone, we're not just angry with them, we want to harm them. And Jesus says that we are murderers. The book of, James takes that even further and says, what causes fights and quarrels among you? Well, you want something, but you don't get it, and so you kill. And then Jesus says, essentially, when you lust, you are an adulterer. So Jesus is confronting people with this notion of like, you are a murderer and you are an adulterer. And lust is this sense of kind of covetousness. It's not just about what we're doing with our sexual mind. So that sense of like, I have lusted to get married. I have lusted to get out of my marriage. I have lusted to have kids. I have lusted to like be free of my kids from time to time. So it's this sense of like, I can covet almost anybody I meet. I can covet something about their life. So it's this sense of like, that is just deeply woven into who I am, and part of this, spiritual formation process of being aware of my lust, being aware of my anger. So when we're looking at the issue of pornography specifically, or any type of lust, it's this sense of, especially in the Christian circles, we have looked at, I know I'm bouncing around, but
go for it, man.
Hopefully this will all make sense. So, I think about like the Mississippi River. So the Mississippi River is so powerful because it's not just one river. There are many, many tributaries that flow into that. So, the Missouri, the Red, the Arkansas, I believe Tennessee River flows into that as well. So when we're looking at this river, it's so powerful because it's many different tributaries. And so when we're looking at any realm of sexual sin or sexual dysfunction or problems, we can never just say it's an issue of lust. I think that is, because what happens then is, if lust is the primary tributary that I'm struggling with, let's get an internet monitoring. Let's try and flee it. Right. Let's try and combat it. Right. And so you try and build this dam against sexual arousal. And then you're like, whoa, it didn't really work because now I have all this anger addressed. So no one ever invited me to understand that anger is very central to my sex life. So that sense of like, when I have been very angry with my wife, when I have been very angry with, ex-girlfriends, that sense of like, those have been some of the moments where porn has been the most appealing, and when I have indulged in it the most. And so it's the sense that like, if I'm angry that my desires are not being fulfilled, if I am being missed, or if I'm just irritated, that can really begin to form, why I am drawn to a particular thing. So that sense of all sexual sin is really that intersection of kind of lust and anger, among other, I think childhood trauma informs into that past sexual abuse,
Sure.
the way that we've been groomed by the porn industry, all of that flows into that. So to me, it's not like what is worse or what is better. I think there are different consequences to it, but I think the heart behind them are very similar in terms of I don't know how to work within my own emptiness. I don't know how to work within my own loneliness. And so I'm going to something else as something of a shortcut to be able to make my life work. And that's part of the nature of idolatry, is that in Isaiah chapter 44, Isaiah is talking about what's the notion of idolatry. And he says you take a piece of wood and you cut it in half. And with half of it, you have a bonfire and you're cooking your food, and it's giving light to your entire camp. But then the other half of the wood, you carve into this ornate structure that you begin to worship and entrust a lot of power to. And so for Isaiah, the notion of idolatry is you take something that is really good and then you make it, in Keller's words, an ultimate thing. And so I think that's what we have to work through, is most of our unwanted sexual behaviors have a level of dignity to it. The desire to be less alone, the desire to be more connected with eyes or passion, or to feel some level of life against the banality of the life that we are now living. But then anything that we begin to lean on for rescue outside of the God of the universe begins to compromise something very, very essential to our humanity. And that's what we're grappling with, is on one hand, it's helped us to survive. On the other hand, it is now impeding and creating a lot of difficulties for us personally, but then also requires the harm of someone else in order for me to have a level of sexual gain. And I think that's, ethics, according to, I believe it's Levinas, would say that ethics always begins in the face of the other. And so with regard to porn, with regard to infidelity, with regard to any of these things that I would say Christian sexual ethics is saying, is this good for the other person's face? And so if I am pursuing a sexual behavior that is putting someone in harm's way in the world of pornography and sexual exploitation, if I am pursuing extramarital affairs or just a hookup to use someone, I have not considered the face of the other in that engagement. So it's not just my own emptiness and brokenness that I'm dealing with. I have actually amplified the level of separation and division within that other person. So I think that's where, back to your previous question around, why Christian sex ethic is, I think, really powerful, is it talks about consent. It talks about all the big hot button topics of our day, but then expounds on them to say, like, no, what is good in the face of the other with regard to the decisions that I'm making.
Man, that's so powerful, man. I remember reading, actually, I'm gonna read it right now. What you introduced this idea that it all starts with anger and lust, which is so true, and it transformed into this idea of harming, right? There's a sense of harming other people, and that's kind of the idea of what we get into. You said this in your book, and I'm just going to read it word for word, and you guys can hear this too, man. This is like, this had me in tears, man, when I read this. I'm not even going to lie. But Jay Stringer, in his book Unwanted, he writes these words: in pornography, a victim is chosen to suffer violation in order to offer the porn user revenge and escape. In the gospel, humanity chooses an innocent victim to suffer death. In Jesus' atonement, we are paradoxically offered the justice and rest we most desire. Both pornography and Jesus appeal to the deepest longings in our hearts. Only one offers freedom. Man, dude. Like, I just think of when I did like struggle with that, and you just look at it from like a, somebody told me this one time. It's like, okay, you want to stop doing that. Just like envisioning yourself like in your room, just like that action.